1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
All right, and with that, we are live. Welcome back. This is episode 4 of the Lone Chemist podcast. My name is Johnny. I'm the Lone Chemist, and with me is my very good friend Abdallah, who just graduated yesterday. So, congratulations.
Thank you very much. It was a great ceremony. If you guys have a chance to check out Northwestern's commencement online, please do so. The keynote speech by Renee Fleming was really quite excellent. She was able to really incorporate, she's an opera singer by training, and she was really able to incorporate, a student choir into her speech. It was really well done. So if you guys have a chance to check it out, please do so.
That's awesome. Yeah, I must be nice having the PhD and, while I'm just suffering in lab.
Yeah, at this point it's official, right? So, it's kind of like the journey towards here has been like in 3 parts. The first time is you do your defense, then you receive your diploma, and then you get to walk and be hooded and formally welcomed into the community of scholars. So that's pretty cool. And a lot of people unfortunately don't necessarily take advantage of it. I feel like it's something worth going through. If you have an opportunity to come back to your institution, get hooded, wear the colors, please do so. It's a wonderful feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I was surprised that Emily, our colleague who just graduated, didn't go. Actually, I think she's in France though, right?
Yeah,
or something like that.
She's in France. Also, I'm not sure if she, there's some timing things. Depends on whether she had submitted it by a certain deadline or something.
Yeah.
But she can, I probably would talk to her, convince her to try to do it next year as well.
Do you get to keep that badass hood that you're wearing?
I do not, unfortunately. We just keep the hat and the tassel. But it's a nice hat. It's kind of like a
swaggy hat, but for sure.
Kind of like British nobility type hat.
Yeah.
I like it.
Because my professors, they kept their PhD hoods in some cases.
Well, in some cases,
you can buy them, right, or something like that.
Well, you can either buy them and keep them for good. I think you have to pay some type of fee, maybe 3 figures, something like that. Otherwise, they can just order it every time they participate in commencement. So, and you just order the robes of wherever you got your PhD from.
Oh. Okay.
So there were quite a few Northwestern professors who presumably got their PhDs from Harvard because they were wearing a lot of Harvard robes.
The crimson and the white.
Crimson, yeah, exactly. So just a nice ceremony. It was raining, but that didn't really deter us from having a good time.
Yeah, for sure. And so with that out of the way, let's get into it. So we're going to talk about television today as a nice change of pace.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week on the Lone Chemist podcast. And that is a meta joke. We will understand the meaning of it later. But the point is, we want to investigate whether television is becoming increasingly cinematic or even more cinematic than the movies themselves. And, we'll go into what in the world do we mean by that? What does that mean to be cinematic? Obviously that will require an in-depth investigation into cinematic tools within movies, but then also trace the history of television and see how those elements that we identify to be cinematic, how they have crept into the television landscape over time, and how that's affecting the way we view television today. And then moreover, what is the role of different ways for us to consume television? Nowadays, is the fact that television is no longer as serialized as it used to be in the past, is that merely a consequence of the way we consume television that's different, or a consequence of just the natural progression of the storytelling elements? So that is something that we'll go over today.
For sure. I'm excited. This has been something that I've been thinking about for a long time. So,
absolutely. We think about it passively, and so we'll be able to, in the context of this conversation, just really dig in and find out the elements behind it.
Yeah, I think a good place to start is like just looking at TV as it is now. It's sort of in a golden age. It's like, I guess maybe not in this instance the golden age, but we've really seen the progression of just really fantastic miniseries and TV shows come to the forefront.
Yeah, so they call it, prestige television, and that's becoming more and more common. Part of it is they have the necessary budget. They're able to hire the best performers that they can get in their hands on. You no longer have to be a TV actor. There's quite a few people who made their names in movies coming back to do TV projects. One good example would be something like Matthew McConaughey.
True Detective. Yeah.
True Detective. Obviously, lending his name to it. Somebody also, other actors coming into television, such as the TV show with like Nicole Kidman. Nicole Kidman's in it. Reese Witherspoon is in it.
Big Little Lies.
Big Little Lies, So like Nicole Kidman, Oscar winner. Reese Witherspoon, I believe she's been an Oscar nominee.
Yeah.
At some
Shailene
point.
Woodley, big up and comer.
Shailene Woodley, probably gonna be either winning or being nominated sometime soon.
For sure.
Skarsgård is in there. He's and these are prestigious actors. They've been winning Emmys. They've been winning awards. And these shows are no longer obscure. These are the types of show where perhaps in the past is something that would not have a lot of viewership, would be for a very particular audience, but now you're seeing increasingly these types of shows being consumed by a mass audience. And so how does that change the way TV proceeds in the future? Do you no longer have the reticence to hire such big name actors? And do you just have a lot more ambition in terms of what kind of stories you want to tell, whether they're inspired by real stories or completely fictional? You still have, you have the operational freedom to basically do what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
And why hire just the best actor? You can hire the best screenplay writer. Somebody like Aaron Sorkin is doing TV now. Some of the best people in terms of making movies, directors. Obviously, we talked about performers and writers. Cinematographers, set designers. All of these people who may have been trained in movies now can find a reasonable home within the television landscape and really operate and make some of the best work in their careers.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, very well said. Good introduction. So let's get into it. So I think before we get into the actual details, which I'll go into a little bit of actually the progression of TV and how it's kind of become this cultural phenomenon as of late, I think we should talk about what it means to be truly cinematic.
Okay.
And so if we look at movies, I think that movies really do a good job of bringing people into the illusion, and they bring people into a world they're trying to convey. Now, whether the world is actually effectively built, we've obviously talked about in different podcasts and stuff, but to me, it's kind of an intangible thing where you can bring someone into a world and then convey an emotionally satisfying story.
Right.
I think that that's a good way to look at cinematicism. Is that a word? Cinematicism?
It is for the purposes of this podcast.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we're just gonna, we'll call Webster's Dictionary and get that in there. But yeah, so I think that having movies be a vehicle towards giving a good story is what really makes it cinematic. And obviously that's kind of the intangible, but the tangible elements of it are, a impeccably written script, great writing, great directing, cinematography that's really unique and new,
right.
Post editing with sound and color palettes and stuff like that. And so if we look at TV, we can see that, throughout the best miniseries that are on, that or have been on, like True Detective and The Sopranos and Breaking Bad, they're increasingly using the more technical elements of film, really sophisticated camera techniques, burying the camera in different places, like Breaking Bad, using one-shot takes, like having digitally altered post footage, like in David Fincher's movies, like when the camera goes through walls and windows and all that kind of stuff. So we see this kind of this slow this leaching of different cinematic elements that are coming towards TV, and it's really interesting because you could argue that as a medium, TV is maybe even overtaking film. And,
absolutely.
And I'm not saying that TV is necessarily better than film or film is better than TV, but it's becoming just a more encompassing phenomenon to have a really effective story be put on TV as opposed to film. And while I love movies, you can't really deny the fact that TV has just kind of come to the forefront of entertainment recently.
Absolutely. And, because part of it is, as we were saying, the scope of it has increased so much that once you have the operational budget to do what you want, it's no longer an issue to go as big as possible. So something like Game of Thrones, for example.
Yeah.
You can credibly bring to life dragons. You can credibly bring to life zombie-like creatures. All of that, those fantastical elements, the reason why they sort of stuck on was they were anchored into a story about relatable characters. Mm-hmm. A relatable sort of sort of a world that's built that's somewhat relatable, even though it will correspond to what we would consider correspond to our sort of Middle Ages. You understand how these characters are moving, and you're fighting for a particular throne. That's something that's a universal sort of a goal. So you understand these characters; they're anchored into a very real world, and so the sort of fantastical elements have a place within that, and you have the ability to utilize these creative artists to be able to actually bring them to life in a way that's believable. Every time you see a dragon on there, it's believable. You can see it, you can feel it. The dragon is not there to just be somewhat of a spectacle. The dragons are real characters, who actually are serving the plot for very actual important reasons. So one example I can give, for example, season 7 of Game of Thrones, the fact that the dragon recognizes Jon Snow as potential, allows him to touch him and stuff like that. That is a character moment between two characters, but it also informs the larger plot that Jon Snow does have Targaryen blood in him, and therefore could be the one that is actually most appropriate in line for the Iron Throne at the end. And it's an example of dramatic irony, because this is something that we as the audience know, but the characters themselves are not aware of. But the moment itself is very powerful. And once again, when they were filming, they had just basically a tennis ball as a reference for that dragon. But given the actors' performances, as well as what we see on the camera, the entire thing is believable. And that's credit to choosing the right sort of set. They were basically at the edge of a cliff. The wind was a real part of the set. They didn't have to artificially create the wind. So, for example, Jon Snow wearing the cloak that he had was almost blown off actually by strong winds. But it is for the sake of the story that you do something like that. So you go big, you get a great set, you have great artists who can actually bring to life the dragon, and you anchor it with your characters' performances, and the entire thing is believable in that sense. So, and that's just an example of a smaller moment. Obviously, you have these big spectacular moments.
Isn't that crazy how those moments, it's such a subtle moment, and it happens in a television show. I mean, would you ever see what's that shitty show, The Big Bang Theory, and would you dissect a moment in that show, and would you elaborate on all the technical aspects? It's incredible what they're able to do on TV these days.
Comedies can also be groundbreaking in their own ways. I would say, given that Big Bang Theory is very much a traditional comedy in that sense.
It's a sitcom, yeah.
It's a sitcom, but you have
But it's terrible.
There are different ways you can break ground. Part of it is, do you break ground by just the stories you tell? Something like Blackish is fairly avant-garde in terms of some of the topics that it breaches. And the writing has to be equally sensitive as well as the performances. So you have those elements as well. But then, you could also have, I'm not sure if you require a drama to have those sort of cinematic elements. I feel like maybe...
And I was being crass. I'm not saying you can't have those small moments in comedy. I'm just saying that the fact that we have this rise of premium television, we have all these little tiny cinematic, moments that we can actually dissect. I mean, people could actually do TV analysis as opposed to film analysis.
Oh, yeah.
There are hundreds of thousands of books written on analyzing moments in film, and I feel like TV is now getting to that level.
Oh, absolutely.
Where we can
You're having people taking courses on Breaking Bad. People are actually teaching semester-long courses. They don't necessarily have to be just, let's say, within the film, like a film or theater major. You can have actual, let's say, literature type of discussions based on those TV shows. And there is room for that. So Breaking Bad, just to focus on that one for a little bit, it's one of those extraordinary shows where you either have to give too much credit to the somebody like the showrunners and the directors, or you just say, well, did they really do this on purpose? Because you can watch one single episode, analyze it many different times, and every single time you do so, you uncover something new about what they did. So, for example, just the visuals. The series long or season long sort of, you have characters that are operating on parallel tracks. So, for example, season 4, you have Walter White versus Gus Fring.
Yeah.
They're essentially the same character, and they're on parallel tracks towards an eventual clash, and everything has been laid out so meticulously. You say, well, it's just awesome and eye-opening how inducing, how much attention to detail they pay to everything.
Exactly. And I think like a good example of that is, this is a really random example, but it kind of proves my point with script writing in TV. So to go back a little further, Vince Gilligan wrote basically the story of the first 3 seasons of Breaking Bad before he even like started filming anything, which I think is amazing. Like, you would never do that like back in the day, but in modern times, having an overarching story is something that's actually expected in TV nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so he had the story laid out, and so because he knew basically where he wanted to end up, not the entire series, but for this big chunk of the series, he was able to introduce little tiny bids and little tiny payoffs, which I'll have a video essay on that in a couple weeks, so stay tuned. But an example of that is, remember when Walter gets his fugue state?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And so like he's in the hospital, and then he sees that painting of like a bridge and a boat and over the ocean and all that stuff. The same painting comes up again in season 5, or season 5, the last episode of season 5, part A, when he's in the hotel room meeting with Jack and the other criminals who are going to commit the huge murder of all the inmates that are going to testify. Like, that's such a small moment, but it shows like you have this anchoring point between the character of what he once was and what he now is.
Right.
And he says like, what is this? I've never seen this before. Maybe I have. Do they have a warehouse of these paintings somewhere? Are they all carbon copies of each other? And for most people who don't analyze the television show that much, they probably wouldn't even notice that. But if you're invested in the lore of the series, then you are immediately like, oh my God, like this is just a small moment, but it shows the care that people take to the pen when they try and write a TV show. And that kind of just serves the fact that TV is becoming a storytelling medium that I don't think anybody really even saw coming. And, that has to do a lot with premium television and streaming, which we'll get into in a bit. But yeah, just, Breaking Bad. I mean, obviously, I'm a huge Breaking Bad fan, my favorite show of all time. But
Breaking Bad, very relatable show, very entertaining show, but you can also indulge yourself by including art house sort of elements that do not detract from the overall story. Because I feel like...
add to it instead.
Yeah, I feel like art house is the type of storytelling medium that it's not palatable for everyone. It's not for everyone, Something like... A recent example was that one horror movie came out like a couple of weeks ago.
Hereditary. Fantastic, by the way. Fantastic.
Great movie, art house horror, but then, the critics gave it wonderful marks, but then the audience score, the cinema score was like D+ or something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
No way.
It's one of those things where art house is just not in everybody's wheelhouse, It's an acquired taste, that sort of thing. But I feel like television, something like Breaking Bad, you can incorporate elements of art house into a mainstream type TV series, and there is no sort of loss in translation. And I would say the most salient elements of art house within Breaking Bad are the cold opens, which is, I'm not sure if it's the first show to do that, but to that extent, perhaps it is. They do a great job, and part of it is, I think, maybe the directors incorporating their own taste into whatever cold open is in any single episode.
Yeah.
Some of them, the cold opens seem extremely random, but they actually play a significant role into the actual episode. So, for example, the episode where they actually rob the train for the methylamine
with the spider. Yeah.
With the spider. So you have the cold open with the spider. Then you have this boy on his bike coming in, picking it up. It seems like a fairly drawn out, completely silent scene, and it doesn't seem like it has anything to do with the entire episode. But then
at the end of the
episode, the child shows up,
and
that is a huge character moment for both Todd and for actually Jesse himself,
and Walt too.
So that's what puts Jesse and Todd into their own antagonistic character arc, and that pays off in season 5. Once basically Jesse is serving as a slave for Todd, and
Ices him.
so you have all these foreshadowings, all of these different ways to drive the story forward, and some of them are fairly art house, and they're just brilliant.
So on that topic, the cold opens. It's not just for the overall episode in some cases. In fact, it's the entire season. Like for example, season 2, all the episodes that start with that black and white kind of pink bear episode, cold open. If you trace back the actual names of the episode, it says 737 flight down over ABQ, and then they kind of tease this thing throughout the entire season, and then only at the last 10 seconds of the season you see that entire moment come to fruition when the plane crash happens. And that just speaks to the fact that the show was just painstakingly written, and it was the attention to detail was crazy from Vince Gilligan and Bryan Cranston, everybody on that writing board.
Exactly.
It's incredible.
I feel like if I were enrolled in some type of class with TV analysis, I can pick any topic and any sort of theme, and I can trace it very easily through that show. So for example, one video essay I saw on YouTube, it was about obviously Walter White versus Heisenberg, and how that sort of dichotomy, because it's that's something that's been bidded in the early season and really pays off in the end, where you feel like you've lost all traces of Walter White, and then that character has become fully Heisenberg. But that sort of dichotomy has been basically traced over the course of many episodes, many seasons. One of them is through the concept of reflections, like mirrors. So Walter White seeing his reflection, what does that mean? What are the events that precede and immediately follow it? All of them are somewhat connected.
Yeah.
Once again, very painstaking, very meticulously crafted story.
And even the second episode, remember after he commits the murder of Emilio and
the first murder.
What's his face? Yeah, I forget. Crazy 8.
Yeah.
But when he's teaching class, he talks about enantiomers.
Yep.
And so we're chemists, so obviously that's a nice bid for us because, we know what enantiomers are. People that are listening are not scientists. Enantiomers are essentially organic molecules that are mirror images of one another.
Yeah, non-superimposable mirror images.
Exactly. So what actually happens is sometimes molecules as drugs in the body behave differently as mirror images. And even though they may look exactly the same, upon closer inspection, they don't behave the same.
Right.
And that's a bid to Heisenberg. He looks exactly the same, but he does not act the same at all. In fact, he acts rather maliciously and, pretty evil, to be honest. But that little tiny bit, it's just like the mirror reflections, they're all kind of, hinted at throughout the entire show. So that's, another really, really, clever element of storytelling that's in Breaking Bad.
Yeah, because, he's a chemist. He knows what he's talking about. The entire show is hinging on enantiomers, because the reason why Walter White's meth is better than everybody else's is because he's able to synthesize it by only making one mirror image of the meth, and that's what makes it blue, actually. So if you make one mirror image, then it turns blue. If you make a mixture of the mirror images, no matter what the purity, it doesn't turn blue. So that's how you differentiate his product from everybody else's.
Is that true?
That is true, yeah. So
really? So I went to a seminar by Donna Nelson, the chemical advisor of Breaking Bad at the ACS, and she said they just put in blue .
Oh no! Well, the blue thing, that's not in real life. That's not how meth behaves. But
it's pretty yellow, right? Because it's conjugated.
Yeah, it's a show. It's a device on the show where.
Oh, okay. They retcon it because they.
Yeah, it's a device on the show.
Got it.
So in the show, it's an element of purity, high purity. So his was basically 99%. In chemistry, we call it 99% enantiomeric excess, which means it's basically a 100-to-1 ratio of the right mirror image and the left mirror and the incorrect mirror image. So the correct mirror image is what gives meth its psychotropic elements, but then the incorrect mirror image actually doesn't have any effects at all. So imagine if you synthesize a batch of meth where you have an equal mixture of both mirror images. You have one that's very active and one that is inactive. Then overall they produce a net near almost zero effect. But if you have a way to synthesize meth when you have one mirror image predominantly versus the other, then you maintain basically all of the psychotropic elements of the meth. And Walter White, being the excellently trained chemist that he is able to do so in both two different ways. Both in the first season, the first few episodes, he does it the same way that that Jesse does it.
Pseudoephedrine reduction.
Pseudoephedrine reduction. Basically, pseudoephedrine has two what's called chiral centers. So if you have two things that have two chiral centers, then you can have not only mirror images, but you can have. So for each chiral center, you have 4 mirror images. So you want to eliminate one so that you can only make 2 mirror images, but then you only want to privilege one of them. And because Walter White is gifted that episode showcased the tool of recrystallization. Because he's gifted at recrystallization, he's able to recrystallize an impure mixture of enantiomers into a single enantiomer, and that's what gives his meth the best sort of effects. And then later in the show, because you no longer have access to pseudoephedrine, he had to make it in a different way.
Phenylpropane, then
so P2P, the P2P cook, where basically you have to. They never actually explicitly say it, but we as chemists can understand. He does something called the asymmetric reduction. So basically, reductive amination, you basically add a hydrogen across a carbon-nitrogen double bond. And so if you add the hydrogen in one face versus the other face, you can get the 2 different mirror images. In Walter White's case, he's able to do it across one single face to get the right enantiomer, and that looks blue.
That's called a stereospecific reduction.
Yep. So just throwing big terms at you, but it's fairly simple. So imagine if your hand is flat, imagine a flat surface. You can either approach the flat surface from the top or the bottom. Let's say you want to approach from the bottom exclusively in order to get the blue meth. So that's what Walter White is able to do. But at the end of the season 5, that's something that Todd wasn't able to do. In Todd's case, he was approaching both from the bottom and the top. So he needed Jesse to be able to just do it from the bottom. And so that's kind of the chemical expertise behind Breaking Bad. But once again, obviously, because of the illegal nature of it, you can't really be that specific. We as chemists understand what's going on. And then the characters themselves, Jesse doesn't really understand what he's doing, but he has the skills. Walter White knows exactly what he's doing. That's why he does it well.
Yeah, Walter White's a practical and theoretical chemist, like in terms of understanding it, and Jesse's just a very skilled practical chemist.
And so that sort of dedication to the art of chemistry is something that Gus Fring actually understands, which is why there was, remember the episode, I think it was somewhere in season 3, where basically they refused to cook meth. And the one that Gus had always basically designated to.
It's episode 1 of season 4.
Episode 1 of season 4.
When Victor.
So Victor says, "Hey, I might not be a chemist, but this is a cook. You just follow a formula." And he was actually following the formula pretty well. But Gus Fring understands that chemistry is an art that cannot be disrespected like that. And basically, even if Victor was able to finish the cook correctly, he disrespected the entire process, and therefore he had to be killed. And that was a way for Gus not only to show the amount of respect that chemistry deserves, but also to send a message to Walter and Jesse, say, hey, if you're not going to cook it, I can kill you.
And also, that's what Jesse said, is that if I can't kill you, you sure as hell going to wish you were dead.
Yeah.
Which is pretty sinister.
Pretty sinister, exactly. Great line.
The great line.
Somebody who's very good at writing scripts had to write that.
Exactly. And I mean, we just had like a 12-minute tangent on Breaking Bad, but that just shows that there's so much depth in TV that's just waiting to be explored, and it's a really exciting time as a film fan and a TV fan to see all these different stories.
So all these things we were talking about just did not just come across from the direction, but you had camera placement, which was very carefully selected once again. The different sounds, the different sort of visuals, all of these sort of cinematic tools were basically able to enhance the storytelling and really draw the viewers into the details of the story.
So I think now that we've kind of laid out, we've kind of nerded out over the last couple minutes about TV shows, which I'm happy to do, of course. I think we should dial down exactly why TV has become such a prevalent, force in media these days. So I think number one is TV shows, by their nature, are longer than movies. They have a lot more runtime to be able to explore different stories. So, if you have a really, really long story that you want to tell, then you can do so, and you can plan out different bids and different seasons and episodes and such, and you can actually fully visualize the story in front of your eyes, as opposed to, this week on da 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 da. It's a nice tool to be able to link together all these elements, and you can do that easily with a longer runtime. And secondly, the best TV shows don't just occur in a vacuum where every single episode is just independent of one another. A good example of that is, even though some of the episodes are connected, The Big Bang Theory is something like that, where it's this week on The Big Bang Theory, there's an exciting incident, there's a solution, and then a resolution, and then everything kind of resets next week.
Right.
An example of that is also South Park. South Park, up until about 2 or 3 years ago, they just had funny things happening in every single episode. And I'm a huge South Park fan, so that's fine. But now they've really actually introduced an overarching story to connect all the episodes. They have different themes that they want to explore in every season. They have things that happen to characters that actually carry across different seasons, as opposed to be contained in a single season. So when you have a TV show that actually links together elements throughout an entire runtime of a season or even series, we're able to pick up on those little bids and payoffs a lot more easily than without.
Absolutely, sure.
And then as I guess a final thing, I think the binge model has really helped TV kind of come to the forefront of entertainment, because of course we have things like Amazon Video, we have Netflix, we have Hulu, we have Prime, we have all these kind of things. And so when a TV show is released in its entirety, it's so much easier to just binge it. And not only can you binge it and get it done in a fraction of the time, you're not waiting for a week for every episode, but also, because the story's fresh in your mind, you're able to see the entire story pan out in front of your eyes.
Right.
And also, a thing with that, at least in my next point, is that there's no commercials, which is fantastic.
There's no commercials, which means you don't have to rely on having some type of climax and then fade to black, do a commercial, come back.
Exactly. And even the shows that did have commercials when they were first aired, like Breaking Bad, when those climaxes happen and it cuts to black, it makes it almost even more impactful, because oh my God, what's going to happen next? And then it just kind of slowly proceeds into the next incident.
Right.
And so that was really, that was started, the no commercials thing was started by Premium TV, which is HBO, in the mid 80s. And, now they're one of the biggest names in entertainment. So when you have shows that don't rely on, commercials, it really sucks you into the illusion, because when you have interruptions in your entertainment, this is why TV was considered on a lower tier than film for so long, because you have ads that are just kind of bringing you down and as serving as kind of a crutch for the TV. And now that we don't really have those ads that kind of snap you out of the illusion, oh shit, I'm watching TV. Now I'm going to see a Listerine commercial or something like that. But when you have an entirely uninterrupted form of media, then we're able to tell stories that are actually, flow very naturally, which is fantastic. And that, and I think that, something like HBO, like The Sopranos, for example. The Sopranos, if it aired on TV, I don't think it would be as nearly as impactful as it did on cable as it was on premium, because every episode was almost a mini movie. It was an hour and 1 minute, give or take, every single episode, with the finales being longer. But they were able to tell a story that was coherent and contained, yet had an overarching story without interruptions from commercials, not having this. And this week on The Sopranos. So, I think all those elements really kind of contributed to why TV has been, a huge dominating force in entertainment these days.
And, everything you said is correct. And you can see the impacts of all of these things. Well, obviously the viewership has significantly increased, but the corollary is that the viewership in movies has decreased. So all the time, I follow box office pretty closely when it comes to movies. You always have things. Well, if you look at it in terms of inflated box office adjusted for inflation, obviously today's movies are going to make a lot less than back in the day, because back in the day, TV, you had maybe 4 different channels you could choose from. So something like the MASH finale, everybody had to see that one.
Bill Cosby Show. That's, you didn't really have many options. Yeah. But, today you have, you have all the different Netflix options. You have Hulu, all of these streaming services that you named, as well as, other types of entertainment within your phone, video games and all that. All of these different things that can pull your attention away. But you have TV shows that are managing to pull
sizable audiences, something like The Walking Dead, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad at that time, all the Mad Men at the time, all of these different shows bringing in tens of millions of viewers, and these are like cable shows as well. It's not like they were broadcast TV, so it's very impressive how much they've been able to progress in such little time. But the other thing I want to just sort of a disclaimer is that the Netflix binge model may not necessarily be suitable for everything. So sometimes whenever you have a new, let's say Marvel releases some type of TV show on Netflix, some of the big complaints that critics will always have in their first sort of viewing of the show without really digesting it is that the first few episodes are slow burners and then it really picks up.
Yeah.
Part of it is, in terms of at least Marvel, they're contractually obligated to put on 13 shows. So it's like 13 hours.
Yeah.
So you have 13 hours that you have to spread out over an entire season. Obviously, the sort of narrative momentum is not going to be sustained all the time. You may have some slow episodes. You may have some faster and more action-packed episodes, but then there may not be an even sort of distribution of action and character moments. Where you don't necessarily have the same problem. A show like Breaking Bad will also have some of those things, but it is so compelling, and by the time you get to those, you have developed such deep intimacy with the characters that you don't mind it so much.
Yeah, sure.
One episode I can think of in Breaking Bad was the episode Fly, which was actually directed by Ryan Johnson.
Yeah.
So that one, it was basically Jesse and Walt inside of the super lab, basically cleaning that up and showing that it is very important that they get rid of this one fly. And that episode, a lot of action, nothing actually happens in terms of action, but there's many character moments and actually some foreshadowings in the future. But the reason why you have those, there's a particular name for those types of episodes. I don't remember what it is, but it's an episode where, let's say during production, you're getting to exceed your budget, where you're like, okay, well,
this week we gotta really
calm down. So we only hire like half of the actors. We'll scale down the action. In this case, it was one set, 2 actors, and you can make an entire episode out of it. That just shows you the strength of the writing.
Yeah.
But so the binge model basically has some limitations that you may not necessarily be able to get around. And in some cases, like something like Game of Thrones is having the similar issues where, they've done 6 seasons of 10 episodes each, and they were like, okay, well, how much longer can we get this going? Our budgets are blowing up now that because the show is so successful, we got to pay these actors. Let's just have 13 more hours. So you say, okay, well, let's have a season 7 where we have 7 episodes, and season 8 and we have 6 episodes. But then you can't just pack 6 hours of content. You have to expand it. So now the rumor is that basically all of season 8 is going to be feature length, meaning 90 minutes. So essentially you have 6 unique movies within season 8. So that's basically the apex of cinematic television, which is you're basically having movies every single time. Miniseries are operating the same way, but it's a smaller sort of scale than something like Game of Thrones. But we'll see how that turns out. Imagine, Lord of the Rings quality filmmaking every single episode for an entire season. Each episode being budgeted for about $15 million at this point.
Yeah.
So, you multiply 15 by that's $90 million. That's a budget for a decent movie. Something like Deadpool will have that kind of budget.
The first one, yeah.
The first
for
one.
Sure.
So that's the sort of thing that we are working with. And, obviously that I would say that's what I would call the culmination of the cinematization of television. But then, so that's one sort of way that the binge model could be limiting, is that, well, we have a certain number of hours, either they're too many or too few, and we have to sort of play around with the content in order to actually fit it in.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that, even though there are valid concerns, I think that like the emphasis on character arc throughout an entire series, I think it kind of outweighs some of the negatives that you would get from that. But I do agree that, I think a good example of that is Daredevil season 2. I think season 2, it's such a non-descriptive term, but I think sluggish is the best way to describe that season. It was just like early on there's a lot of great action, there's a lot of great character moments, and then it just kind of kept going for like 4 or 5 episodes. And it was kind of tiresome, to say the least.
The way they had to get around that was you couldn't anchor the entire season on Daredevil himself, so you had to bring in the Punisher, basically have a backdoor extended backdoor pilot for a Punisher TV show, because his character and his season arc was pretty compelling, and you had them on opposite sides. They clash frequently, they clash early, and by the end they're basically unwitting allies. And then obviously they have enough differences that they can never properly be partners. So you have some that's a way to counterbalance the sort of sluggishness that you're talking about. But then not every single show has that luxury. The first season of Jessica Jones, you could bring in Luke Cage, even though you don't go too deeply into Luke Cage's background. The fact that he's there, and at some point actually serves as the antagonist because he's being controlled by Kilgrave, that is something that you can rely upon it's not just a gimmick at this point. But when you have a situation where you basically have one character who may not necessarily have enough content in terms of their comic book history to sustain an entire season, if you're not creative about how you fill out the rest of the content, then you can have a very drawn out and actually low quality show. Yeah,
like Elektra is a good example of that. Elektra just did not have, not in terms of the comic book, she's a huge rich lore in the comic books, but it was handled so haphazardly in that series where I think Elektra kind of brought the series down, to be completely honest.
Yeah, well actually I think the criticism that I'm talking about happened exactly with Iron Fist. Iron Fist was the kind of, well, I just think I just don't know if it was a well-conceived show. I think
it wasn't.
They just kind of rushed it, I feel like.
Yeah, they were like, okay, we have to fill 13 hours of content, introduce a character, bam, Defenders, miniseries.
We didn't really know how to handle him, so let's just do it this way. I feel like if they had waited a little bit, Marvel, it's Marvel. It's the overall brand. Yes, I understand that the TV and the film universe are not connected, but if you waited a little bit and you see what the movie series has done with Doctor Strange in terms of how it brought magic into the MCU, then you can sort of bring something similar to to the small screen and anchor it around a character where you would actually have properly designed motivations. And it just didn't really work out that way. Now they're doing season 2. He has some presence in Luke Cage, which came out yesterday. I haven't had a chance to check it out. Season 2. So Iron Fist has a small presence in there, and then presumably they're working towards a future where they're together. They have a rich comic book history. Power Man and Iron Fist. They might move into, and they're called the Heroes for Hire. They might move into that sort of format next season. Yeah. But the other things that could impact, I would say, the quality of a TV series is if you know what's coming next, right?
Yeah.
It makes whatever happens in that particular season you're focusing on less important. So if you know the Defenders is coming, that means obviously you can't kill off any of your main characters.
Yeah.
Or if you end the Defenders with a shocking revelation that, oh my God, Daredevil might be dead. Well, we know that there's going to be a Daredevil season 3.
Exactly.
So you have to end it on a scene where he's, being taken care of in the hospital. You can't cheat the viewers out of knowing the future. And this is why I think Infinity War was so bold, because it killed off some of his characters without any resolution within that episode. Even though we know what's coming next.
We have no idea how it's going to resolve.
We don't know how he's going to resolve. And they never cheated us by giving us hints about it.
Exactly. They just ended with that smug
smirk.
Yeah,
they embraced the fact that, hey, they embraced the tragedy of it. And I think that's something that TV shows don't necessarily do very well.
Absolutely. I agree with that for sure.
Yeah. So.
And so segueing from that, that was, very well said with the Marvel TV shows and some of the drawbacks of that. I think something that's really come to the forefront is that, and you kind of touched on it earlier, is the camera work in TV shows.
Yeah.
I think that's what really, is what locks you in initially to a great TV show and why it's becoming more cinematic or as cinematic as film. in the first episode of a TV show, you're not listening for the script in the first 2 minutes. You're looking at how it looks aesthetically and the production design.
Tone and production.
The tone, the color palette, and the camera is the kind of link that puts it all together. And so, a good example from what you just said is Daredevil, which is the season 1, episode 2, with that entire one-take fight scene, for example, when Daredevil's fighting people in and out of the rooms, and you show explicit exhaustion and fighting, and it's like a 4-minute scene. That's some of the best camera work I've ever seen in TV.
Absolutely.
Another example of that is True Detective in episode 4, when they have a 8-minute continuous shot throughout multiple buildings and multiple scenes and multiple characters, and it all comes together, seamlessly. That's something you'd see in a Quentin Tarantino movie or an Alexandre Iñárritu movie like that, or Alfonso Cuarón or Roger Deakins, something like that. The camera work is just incredible in TV shows nowadays, and obviously you contribute that to higher budgets because premium television is becoming a lot more important in entertainment. But I think it's just because they want to try things that link, movie fans to TV and prove that, yes, it is truly a medium that people can latch onto for great stories.
Right.
Yeah.
It wouldn't be rare or unusual to see those big directors' names in doing TV. Rian Johnson did several episodes of Breaking Bad. David Fincher. Fincher, he basically was a showrunner initially. Not a showrunner, but he directed the first couple of episodes of House of Cards. Maybe Mindhunter as well, but House of Cards.
Oh, yeah, House of Cards?
Yeah, he did direct the first couple of episodes. And then, he's a big name. He kind of sets the tone for the series so that whichever director comes after him, that's something that they can build upon. And so, if you're gonna have such a long sort of series that you have characters who are starting from way out of the left field and ending up into, these characters have to be very dynamic. Obviously, they have to grow across seasons. So, you have Frank Underwood basically starting off as a minority whip, becoming the president. Well, it doesn't happen overnight. So you have to sort of set the type of tone, the type of character beats, the type of, the look and the feel of the show. And that's something that you bring in the big guns to do that, and then you basically just sustain that sort of model.
Exactly.
And that happens frequently in television nowadays.
And it's great to see because, one of the negatives that I can see, I guess, with TV is the fact that, if you have all this great entertainment at your fingertips, in your phone, your computer, and your TV, and whatever streaming device you have, it doesn't really incentivize leaving the house for any kind of entertainment. Unless you're seeing a live show, of course, like a Broadway show or a stand-up comedy show or something like that. It makes everything attainable. Like, if you have a smart TV, of course, you can just stream Netflix and you can surf the internet and you can do all this stuff just right from your couch. So I guess it's one of the negatives about TV taking such precedence in culture is that it maybe doesn't really incentivize leaving the house for entertainment. Yeah. But that's kind of a taboo criticism.
Well,
I guess.
Part of it is how do the people competing for our attention, how do they basically convince us to come out to the movies and watch them? So, for example, somebody like Christopher Nolan, you're going to make a movie where you basically have to force your audience to check it out in IMAX. Something like, Dunkirk. Well, Dunkirk, it's fine. If you watch it in a 2D smaller theater, but go to the IMAX, really listen to these jet engines, really listen to these war noises, and watch it on the biggest screen possible for that kind of experience.
Same thing with Quentin Tarantino, too. He did the roadshow format for Hateful Eight, and he projected it in 70 millimeter film. He had a score, he had a program, he had an overture, he had intermission stuff. So he kind of made one of the ways that I guess movies can combat the rising relevance of TV is maybe make the movies more of an event again, like it was back in the 50s and 60s and 70s.
Right.
And it's like you said, Chris Nolan, he makes films to be viewed a very specific way. Otherwise, you won't actually, get the meaning, or you won't actually get the most out of the experience. Same with Tarantino, and in some ways Fincher too. Seeing something like Fight Club on a small screen is kind of shitty. But if you see those amazing camera angles and everything like that on a huge screen, the story and the characters are even more impactful than they already were.
Yeah. So, the overall conclusion from that is, if you're a filmmaker, you kind of have to try really hard to convince audiences to go out to the movies. But then the negative aspect of it is certain types of movies are no longer being made. For example, the mid-budget drama doesn't really have a place anymore in today's cinemaplex. So you have the movies that do well financially are the big blockbusters or slash smaller movies that employ big name actors, such as any movie that The Rock makes.
Yeah.
You're not gonna have like an Avengers type budget, but you're gonna you can rely upon having some type of $100 million box office. There are a few actors who can pull that off. Somebody like Kevin Hart, somebody like The Rock, maybe Tom Cruise, depending on the type of movie he does. Will Smith, depending on the type of movie.
Not the Mummy, though. Not
the Mummy. Or Will Smith hasn't really had that kind of luck recently, but I think he had an extremely impressive run where he'd made like 10 or a little bit, I think more than 10 consecutive movies that hit $100 million in the box office.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have those kind of movies that are, kind of manifestations of genre, like the kind of Roland Emmerich disaster epic with like The Rock, coming in as the savior of the city and stuff. I mean, you can kind of rely on those kind of meta elements.
Somebody actually, there was this meme on the internet saying that you have like it's kind of like the same image of The Rock. He's in some type of forest wearing like fatigues. And it's like 4 different movies, but it looks like it's just one movie.
Yeah, Jumanji, San Andreas, Skyscraper, and like something else.
Something else. The exact same image of The Rock in some type of forest environment.
Oh, yeah, they just Photoshop him.
Yeah, so,
marketing's lazy now.
But, you can rely on those movies to do well because generally speaking, you have a reasonably good story, but also a very charismatic actor putting it together. But, in terms of movies that do well, you have the big blockbusters, the Avengers. Some of them can fail, like Star Wars. Some of them can be very successful, like the Avengers or Incredibles or Deadpool. But then you also have genre movies tend to do well, like comedies tend to do well. Horror especially tends to do well. So, Quiet Place. I don't know why. Some people were saying it's a surprise. It shouldn't be a surprise. If you have a well-designed horror movie, it will sell.
Well, no, for sure, but I think the surprise was the fact that, horror movies are going to sell, but a good horror movie is very hard to come across these days.
Sure, something original as well,
Exactly, and a surprise director with John Krasinski, who actually, came from TV. He knows how to direct from TV,
right.
And then he applied that to a horror film, which was like these kind of conflicting different motivations from this actor being a director, and I think it paid off very nicely. Like horror films like that, I think are very refreshing. I mean, this is kind of off topic, but like The Conjuring, for example, Conjuring 1 and 2 are both fantastic films,
right.
And they're horror films, and they sold well because they're horror films, but also because they have great scripts.
Right.
Quiet Place, Hereditary, both fantastic films. I think that you're right to an extent that genre does sell, but it was surprising because it was such a great movie, on top of being a good genre, satisfying movie.
And, nowadays you're having horror TV shows, something like American Horror Story or something else along those lines, where
like Slasher on Netflix or that kind of series.
Those kind of series would not have existed in the past, but now you understand. You've had enough history in the movies about what type of horror does well, what resonates well with audiences, and then you're able to tailor it to a TV audience, make some show that is very specific and wholly original simultaneously. And then, somebody coming in, like let's say somebody who's in school right now studying the art of filmmaking and, making television, will come out being ready to produce completely original real estate in television. And so there's just a lot of opportunities to pursue in television, and you have fewer sort of constraints than movies in order to pull that off. But at the same time, there are quite a lot of, for every successful TV show that we're able to bring into the conversation today, you have many that fail as well.
Oh yeah.
So what is it about them that are, why do they not connect with audiences? Is it just the right fit or not? Part of it is, if you're on broadcast TV, you play it safe. Obviously you don't want to deal with censorship. You don't want to deal with anything that will limit the type of audience you're able to reach. So maybe not taking those risks will take away the type of audience you can reach and the type of content you can have. So then you move to premium TV, television, cable, where you can have like PG-13 type of content, even R-rated type of content. Netflix, you can have those types of things. You're no longer bound by a specific set of rules. You don't go safe and then you go big and actually pull off whatever you intend to pull off.
What I really liked about what you just said is, Breaking Bad, for example, aired on AMC. AMC's not a premium channel; it's just a cable channel. But they filmed the series of Breaking Bad as if it was a premium series. They had nudity and they blurred it out. They had swears, but they bleeped it out. And then when they actually released the series on DVD and Netflix, they actually presented it as it's meant to be seen.
I see.
Which is like it's actually very subtle because you film a series a very, very certain way, and then even though the media of broadcast doesn't really allow you to artistically convey exactly what you were trying to show, you have the binge model of Netflix to be able to present your series as it was meant to be seen.
Right. And, imagine something like Game of Thrones nudity. Some of it is gratuitous, but some of it is actually serves the plot very well. So you have to have it in there. And Spartacus is similar type of TV shows. You have to have it in there. It's part of the story. So being able to present it as it's meant to be is important. So you do that in premium television.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, do you think there's any future ways it can go with TV before we kind of wrap this up? Like,
like I said, I feel like I like it. I like the sort of American Horror Story model where. Actually, a great example is Black Mirror.
Yeah.
Black Mirror, where you can have something completely unrelated. All these episodes are unrelated, but the concept is, what is
dystopian future of
technology.
Yeah.
That you can have something so vague, but tell so many stories within that realm. I feel like that could be a good future of television making.
It's kind of like the new Twilight Zone almost, where it's like you have just kind of this paranormal kind of fantastical elements, and they're all contained within the show, but every episode essentially is different, but they still kind of link together very, very subtly, which I think that's actually a really brilliant way to tell stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, obviously they pioneered, perhaps they pioneered that concept, and it may not necessarily be so easy for anybody to come in and imitate them. But then, I think I think you can anchor it into something specific. Let's say you have a show that's set entirely in outer space where the rules are different. Obviously maybe gravity is different, maybe
aliens you encounter, space travel.
Not necessarily Star Trek, but a sort of universe where you have all these different stories that don't necessarily interact, and you just basically give any director the chance to come in and really just tell what they want to tell. And maybe that's not something that's appropriate for a movie to do, because you just don't have the amount of real estate. Let's say you only have 1 hour as opposed to 2 hours. You can make a much more concise and focused story within television with a limited budget, but then really, really hone in on the actual presentation of it, as opposed to making, maybe a half-assed movie where you stretch everything out. You introduce elements where it's just basically filling out a time portion as opposed to actually serving the story you want to film.
Exactly. Like, and a good example of that is, the cinematic abomination in 50 Shades of Grey, where it's like they have all those nudity and sex scenes, obviously from the source material, but also because they just need to pad the runtime. Okay, we have to have a sex scene in the shower. We have to do something like with whips and all that stuff. Yeah. So it's like you're just doing scenes for the sake of just checking a box. Okay, do we have a boob shot? Check. Like, do we have a whip shot? Check. And so that doesn't serve the story at all. It's stupid. There are other examples, but 50 Shades of Grey is the funniest one.
So genre adaptations, I think, is the way to go forward. So, and it doesn't have to be in a way that you would expect. So something like Legion. Legion is he's basically a mutant. You have mutant powers, but you don't. That show is a weird show. It's an art house superhero show basically. That is not told in the way you would expect it to be told. But then you have show creators and showrunners being empowered to basically do their own take on something like that, and it works for whatever. It might not be for everyone, but it works in the way that they present it. But at the same time, now you're running into the risk of, HBO has Game of Thrones, HBO has Westworld. We gotta have our own thing. So now you have Amazon coming up with a Lord of the Rings series.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
They acquired the rights, and I think they're still in development. But presumably within the next 3 years, you'll see something like that. how is that really gonna look? You shouldn't expect. I don't think it would be reasonable for us to expect Peter Jackson's sort of vision playing out on a weekly basis on TV.
They might just put him in like a producer credit just for the name
Oh
recognition.
no! I'm sure they will, but I'm saying that you don't want that type of production necessarily being on TV.
No,
I think
for
it
sure.
has to be adapted in some way.
For sure.
And that would be more compelling. Again, you didn't want to Bryan Singer's X-Men playing out in Legion, so you have to make a different show. Marvel has this Cloak and Dagger, which I'm not sure if it's out yet. I believe it was supposed to come out sometime this month, but Cloak and Dagger being a superhero show will probably not be told in the same way that you would expect a Marvel movie to be told.
Apparently, it's supposed to be kind of like an urban, almost buddy cop kind of thing, where it's like, these two kind of like diametrically opposed people, like kind of like learn to live with themselves, and also all of the grave that's
sure,
around
yeah,
them.
that kind of makes sense.
It's an interesting concept. It'd be really cool, like going back to that that almost anthology element where like every episode is a bit different from
Right.
the other one, but it's still linked together. Something would be really cool is like if it was set in a superhero universe and 13 episodes a season, and it was called Origins, and like every single episode is like a different origin of a certain hero, how they get their powers, an
Right.
early formation of their career or as a superhero, and then every episode obviously is linked to the fact that they go into like the formation of a set of beliefs or powers that a character has, but you don't really have to reference all the other shit, so it's still kind of an extended universe model, but it's contained the fact that every episode is a story of one hero.
Right.
That'd be pretty cool.
The potential danger there is the serialized nature of it. Like this week we're focusing on this hero.
For sure.
But then
yeah.
if you because if you make it into an anthology format, let's say you have a different director for everything, but then you have different perspectives. It doesn't have to be black and white. Like not all of them have to be. Let's say you have an origins. If I were to do something like that, not all of them would have to be protagonists. Some of them would probably have to use...
for sure.
Yeah.
Any character in that superhero universe, like for example, having David Cronenberg, for example, do like the origins of the Fantastic Four, like because David Cronenberg did like the kind of body horror movies like The Fly and all those kind of things, and so like it hasn't really been investigated. Like the Fantastic Four, they're monsters. Like their lives change before their eyes. I mean, The Thing is the best example of that. He becomes a monster when he was a kind-hearted guy with a bunch of kids and a wife and stuff.
Right.
So like investigating that kind of like body horror image, which was kind of teased in Justice League, which you know how that turned out. But but also, and then like so. That'd be episode 1. Episode 2, if you wanted to have kind of an urban thriller, someone like David Fincher, he uses a lot of like different blurring techniques in camera and like digital, camera scopes and all that kind of stuff. For I guess someone like maybe Raven from the Teen Titans or something like that.
And then Moon Knight
yeah, exactly. And so actually Moon Knight's a very underrated superhero. They should really do more stuff with him.
Moon Knight should see. Here's the thing about Moon Knight. I feel like Moon Knight's story would play out better in TV than it would as a movie.
Absolutely would. If they had a miniseries about him, that would be awesome.
Yeah, so television can become a medium that allows you to tell stories better than a movie can.
Yeah.
Or a movie franchise. Because again, if you want a movie franchise, you probably want to keep it PG-13 rated.
Yeah.
Logan and Deadpool are starting to buck the trend, but until it becomes more prevalent among this particular genre, keep it on TV, make it R, just make it dark.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good idea. I think that if there were some DC shows that were on TV and they were trying to be more dark, I think they would serve a lot better than they would on film. Because we've seen in the Zack Snyder movies, having darkness just for the sake of darkness is just not really palatable in the cinema these days. Because you want to bring the viewer out of their seats. You don't want to have them wish they never came in the first place.
Right.
But with darkness, like in a TV show, you can actually expand on all the character elements as slow as you want, and then you can have that darkness kind of serve as an undertone for the entire series.
Yeah, and I feel like Arrow did that very well.
I haven't seen Arrow yet. I really
in the first couple of seasons. It was a dark show, and he was serving a main character who was killing people. And then season 3, I think, is where he really starts to change based on his interaction with the other characters. He actually starts acquiring a team around him. Basically, he's convinced to not kill anymore, and But the problem with something like Arrow, those kind of shows have 23 episodes in a season, and that's probably tending towards being too long. So 23 hours, you have themes that repeat themselves. You have character interactions that are repetitive. You have things that are redundant across seasons, across one season. And that makes it a lot less compelling, and maybe you're losing audience members along the way. So as long as you're able to have enough of a story, and that's something that would have benefited from bringing in somebody else that could serve as a great counterpart to Oliver Queen, and then expanding upon them rather than having basically Oliver going through the exact same drama over and over and over again. So there are opportunities to improve what we already have, but then there are opportunities to innovate in other ways as well. And I think I hope that is the type of direction that the industry is going towards. Maybe it doesn't have to be superhero. I feel like, or if it is superhero, make it different. Do what Legion did.
Yeah, the market's kind of saturated with superhero kind of content these days.
The market is, but what the nice thing about superhero genre is it can allow you to focus on a particular genre of storytelling.
Yeah, like, exactly.
Let's say you want to make a heist movie, or a horror movie, or even a crime thriller,
social
all of these
thriller
different
or
things.
something like that.
Yeah, so all of these different things, like Moon Knight versus a Spider-Man TV series will be completely different, obviously. Yeah. But then, you can have dark elements within Spider-Man, like on an episode-by-episode basis, and that will inform his character. That will make it more compelling. At the same time, you can have moments of levity in the Moon Knight that will make it more compelling as well. So there's a lot of opportunities, and I think, we just need the right people
for sure.
To be creative, to be willing to explore and just make good television.
Yeah, because the medium is kind of a tabula rasa, kind of blank canvas at this point, and TV is kind of what you make it. So I think it's a really exciting time to be watching TV these days, because I never really considered myself that much of a fan of TV. Obviously, I liked it when I was younger, but now that I really examine it, TV has just become an incredible medium to actually tell stories, and it's pretty exciting and to see where it's going to go in the next couple of years.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, so I think that was a very informative discussion. And anything else want to say to the viewers before we sign off?
Yeah, go ahead and watch that No Fuss on Commencement. It's good. It's a worthy investment of your time.
All right, and as always, please subscribe to the channel. Please like and share the video. We'd really appreciate it. And if you have any kind of topics in the future, please let us know.
Sounds good.
All right, my name is Johnny.
My name is Abdallah.
And we will see y'all next time.
We are the Lone Chemists.
Isn't that kind of an oxymoron now?
Well, now we have a community of YouTubers around us, right?
Yeah, no, slowly, surely winning the race. All right. Thanks a lot, guys. See ya.